Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 29 of Sports Shorts. I'm Bobby Hacker, SLA board member and immediate past president. And today our guest is Kap Misir, the Associate General Counsel of Rock Nation Sports. Welcome, Kap.
Thanks, Bobby. Thanks for having me. Thanks, Sports Lawyers Association, for having me as well.
Well, it's great. And it's always good to have a longtime SLA member, which you are. So that's sort of double good for our program today. And I will force you to talk about what a great organization it is, which I know you can freely do.
Well, that's what we're contractually obligated to do, based on the money you're paying me to do.
That's big. All my guests get the same. Big money. You might get twice as much as everybody else.
Okay, well then I'll lay it on thick.
So we've talked before, and part of our program schedule is to start with talking about your job. You know, what does the title mean? What do you do on a day-to-day basis? And also, we'd like to talk a little bit about your path. For a variety of reasons, a lot of lawyers are thinking about wanting to get into the sports business. And a lot of law students think, oh, I want to be a sports lawyer. And the difference between law students today and law students back many, many, many years ago for me is that there's actually something called sports law. And it's broad, and to define it is to define everything that touches on sports. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your job and sort of your path, how you got in this space?
Yeah, so I mean, what I do now as Associate General Counsel for Rock Nation Sports is, listen, we handle a lot of our Major League Baseball, NFL, and NBA players, our clients, and as well as NIL athletes. It starts off with the marketing and the endorsement side of things, anything that our marketing department touches with respect to procuring a deal, whether it be a endorsement, sponsorship, influencer type of agreement, apparel, equipment, so on and so forth. NFTs now are kind of a hot commodity coming into the space of sports. All those agreements, I'll work in conjunction with our head of marketing, Bob Phelps, and kind of try to make sure we protect our clients' rights. I mean, that's first and foremost, right? We need to make sure everything they're doing. So listen, each deal we get, we go back and forth. Sometimes some of them are smooth because we have a good relationship with the company. Outside of kind of that marketing aspect with the contracts, I'll deal with athlete agent compliance with the states, which kind of goes hand in hand, obviously, with recruiting and NIL. So make sure all of our agents are compliant and up to date with everything state regulation wise with their registration. In addition, listen, any kind of on-field contract with relating to any of the three sports that I mentioned will kind of come through me, working in conjunction with the agents and the heads of the department to make sure certain languages are protecting our clients the way we want, whether that's necessarily guaranteed languages or any kind of addendums. Obviously, most of these contracts are uniform in nature from the respective league and union, but there's obviously some manipulation to them that's needed and some negotiation that's needed as well. So from a legal perspective, I'll be a part of that. Taking that step further, salary arbitration. Whenever we get back to the world of baseball, salary arbitration is something that, I work hand in hand here with our COO, Brody Van Wagenen. And, we will come together and when the time comes again and start cracking away at salary arbitration. So that's in and of itself a beast. I mean, that's a lot of legwork, a lot of analysis of stats and past compensation of baseball players. So that's kind of in a nutshell. I know I'm leaving out things that I've done, but that's kind of in a nutshell what we do at Rock. I mean, obviously we have kind of this 360 approach where we have our own in-house, publicist that works with our clients, and anything that they have that they're securing, that'll come through me. When we have our philanthropy department for any charitable events that athletes want to do, those agreements will come through me. So we obviously have our digital department that same thing. Those agreements will also come through me, whether it's trying to spice up and make the social media platforms for our athletes more visible, or obviously going back to any kind of multimedia type deals that we procure.
Yeah, and it's interesting because going back a little bit in the wide range of the sorts of deals you do, you made reference to the NIL deals with collegiate athletes, or I guess now high school athletes too, are starting to come into play. But I don't think a lot of people do understand sort of the fragmented nature of NIL legislation and the fact that it's not even in every state has NIL legislation. There's certainly no federal legislation, and Alston completely, tied the hands of the NCAA to come up with anything. So on a practical matter, how do you juggle NIL rules when there's no uniform statutory basis?
Very carefully, very carefully. I mean, I've since I've gotten here, I think, I've been here since July, which is right when it started, when it passed. And so it's been, part of my office, if you see it, part of it's read well is with, I like to sometimes print out some of the legislation. So I'm reading it in real time and knowing what's going on. But it's such a multi-layered analysis, right, Bobby? Like it's, if our marketing agent comes over and says, we have an NIL deal, well, I got to first check with the state, as you mentioned, state law. Do they have a state law? Okay, they do. So I'm going to look at it and review, make sure the agreement's in compliance. There's any issues there. But then now we have this other layer now where the universities have their policies. Now, listen, I think most of the universities are kind of in line with the state law that if they have it in their state. And most of the states, I think, somehow they have some sort of uniformity amongst them, right? But obviously there's some differences. So once you look over the school policy, then you kind of have your full grasp of now entering and looking at this contract, right? So I have all the ingredients now. Now it's time for me to kind of cook the contract to make sure it's compliant. And so there's been many times where I've had to tell X company or Y company that, hey, this is tantamount to maybe pay for play with this language. We need to take that out. That's not what this is about. Or, the expiration of the term of the agreement. Some states where you can't have the contract extend beyond their career as a collegiate athlete. So things like that, when we have to deal with it, we'll deal with it. When we have states that don't have laws, then we rely solely on the universities. The problem sometimes tends to be is that most universities do have their policies public when you go to their websites, but some don't. And so it becomes a struggle sometimes to try to get in contact with someone to make sure we could get some guidance. But I think having a good relationship with the compliance officers and the athletic departments is key. I try to maintain them as much as I can, and so far so good. But that's kind of the way I'll approach our collegiate NIL when we deal with high school. Again, another layer to the test, right? I mean,
mom and dad,
dealing with minors, etc. And so again, if the state legislation addresses it, great. If not, we go to the high school athletic associations and what are they saying? What's their position? Then there's another layer to it, right? Because now you have some schools and or academies that aren't even a part of the athletic associations, or they're standalone schools or academies. How do we handle that? So now it becomes another layer of analysis. It's a long-winded way for me saying, yeah, I got to juggle it carefully, Bobby. So
yeah, and it's interesting in the space because the constant droning sound you hear is no pay for play, no pay for play. And that line is getting fuzzier and fuzzier and fuzzier from the perspective of someone who doesn't really work in the space. A sports fan, particularly when you see, based upon the new transfer rules in collegiate sports, well, I'm going to leave, for example, Oklahoma and go to USC.
Yeah.
I mean, at what point? I mean, how carefully are schools really looking at it? Because, again, my concern has always been to protect the student athlete from not losing their eligibility. Because if we look at it statistically, of the thousands of athletes in the money-making sports, basketball, football, less than 1% are ever going to play pro sports. Yeah. And all these other guys, that could be their educational backbone that they're risking. It seems such a slippery slope, and it seems that the universities have to develop strong financial literacy programs at the very least. Are you finding that they're embracing that responsibility?
I think for the most part, yeah. From everyone I've talked to for the universities we've had to deal with for our NL guys, they have been. I know that a lot of the universities have their own internal, I guess, a classroom type procedure where they try to educate the student athletes. And for our NIL clients, they are educated to that effect and they're doing a good job staying on top of it. because I make sure to tell them to stay on top of it, and the marketing agent will take sure to stay on top of it, because it's a good kind of gateway into the athletic departments to know what's ever evolving. Because listen, this is ever evolving. I mean, from the time this first started in July till now, you have people out there who claim to be experts in NIL. I don't think it's too early to even deem yourself as an expert at NIL, because we don't know what we haven't seen it play out right now. And so it's kind of hard to gauge, where this is going. But, every time I read and I hear the term Wild Wild West, I tend to see why people are saying that, because at times it does feel like that. But at times, it's a smooth transaction. And as long as the clients are getting what they want and they're protected and they know what they're getting themselves into, we have a good set of marketing department here that makes sure that happens.
And historically, as I think everyone that's listening knows, and certainly both of us have experienced, there was a time, way back 8 or 10 months ago, when if you were a student athlete and you had an agent, that was it. You were gone. Now you can have, and as my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, agents or some sort of representatives are permitted for doing these NIL deals. And if that's a correct statement of fact, what happens when that student athlete's eligibility is up and they want to turn pro? Do they have to hire a separate agent, or can they work with that same marketing agent, or is that an open question?
So I'll start at the beginning. I think that, when you have agents that are allowed to be certified agents within the respective union, and the way most of the rules and laws are written, they're allowed to do that. They're allowed to represent for NIL purposes. But the way most of the language is carved out, especially when you look at either from the state legislation's perspective or the university policies, I interpret it to be a limitation. There's a limitation that the representation is limited only for marketing purposes, and I'm really just generalizing here, but specifically not for professional purposes, professional contract purpose. So not trying to get hey, come with me, we'll represent you for marketing, and then we'll also try to we'll represent you as well for when you go to the draft. It's two separate things. And I've had conversations with compliance officers about this specific issue, and I shouldn't say issue, the specific topic is that, that's how most of the compliance officers that I speak with have interpreted. There is a separation. Sometimes there's languages for it, which is why they have separate registrations for certified agents, right? That's why agents need to register in states and so on and so forth. Now, to the second part of your question, what happens when that time is up, whether the collegiate career is over because they're going early or because they've graduated? Yeah, they have the right, student athletes have that right. They've earned that right to select who they want as their representation. And so they can stay on, whether it's to stay on with the agent they're at or go separately to another agency. There's no prohibition on that. And, listen, again, most of the unions here at MLB, NFL, and NBA, they grant the right to agents in the first place to represent players. So you have to look at that aspect. I think the question is, how much control do the universities have over certified agents from the unions for the leagues? And I think the thing is, at the end of the day, the student athletes have the right to choose who they want to represent them, and they could do that. So I don't think there's any type of issue there with respect to, as long as there's a clear line of demarcation when they're representing them as NIL student athletes, and it's for marketing purposes only, and that's it. So
I would assume that the standard Roc Nation representation agreement is a little different if you're representing a Major League Baseball player, you're representing a college football player.
Yeah, as every agency should be, in my opinion. So there is. Yeah.
Well, that's good. And also, as long as we're diving into the alphabet a little bit,
yeah,
I imagine that across the whole range of what you guys are doing involves the world of NFTs, both in the college and professional space. Yeah. How's that working for you guys? What's that like? I mean, talk about a Wild West.
Yeah, it's again a new area, a new world that's coming into our lives in sports, and it's hot right now, in my opinion. I think athletes want to get involved, and companies want to get involved with athletes. And so from a legal perspective, those type of contracts take a little bit longer to review and to go through because it's new and there's so many different areas you have to touch, intellectual property areas and then rights. And so it's a matter of just really being careful with that, and it's ever evolving. That's something that I think, listen, any practicing lawyer, you try to read and keep up to date because, I hear the lawsuits are starting to unfold with NFTs and those are things that you have to kind of just stay up to date with because there isn't any kind of real legislation out there that's guiding people right now on how to do this. And so I think it's a matter of treating those contracts very carefully and going through them to make sure all rights are protected, especially for the athlete here.
Yeah, it would seem to me that people that are involved in intellectual property law in any aspect would really understand it, but those who don't touch on it on a regular basis may miss out on really important issues like team logos and team names and who owns the actual footage. You can't just say, oh, here's a great picture of me doing whatever. You got to peel that onion back a lot and make sure everybody's lined up. And I would imagine that, if you want to use everybody else's marks, somebody else is going to raise their hand for a piece of the pie.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I try to make it that the onus is on not the athlete or our client. The onus for that type of clearance will come from the company or the maker of the NFT. I think I think the other thing to look at is now as you see the advent of using sweepstakes and contests as kind of a way to have, that's another layer of the onion, right? That's a specific niche dealing with that language. So, my suggestion is, listen, since it's so new and unless you deal with IP on a regular basis, like you said, try to use those outside resources if possible, because I think this is something that, we have to make sure everyone is protected on it. And that's what we try to do here.
Yeah. And I think for the law students that may be checking into this, it's one of those lessons where indemnity provisions, insurance provisions, knowing what E&O coverage is something that you have to know and become critical parts, especially when you're dealing in new media spaces.
Yeah. And so we'll see how this plays out. But I think it's definitely a one of the contracts when they come across my desk, I treat it, I treat all of them with cautious, but that one I treat it overly cautious.
And I know we've sort of, we didn't touch upon one of the earlier questions, but I really want to go back to it, which is your path. And for those of you out there in Sports Shorts land on Facebook Live, the two of us met at an SLA conference in Atlanta in 2013, and almost a decade later, we're still hanging out. So there's some value to what you learn at these conferences. But, explain how a collegiate baseball pitcher ends up as the AGC at Rock Nation.
Gosh, probably different than most people's paths. I mean, I'll start before we met. I think that'll paint a clearer picture. I think when I graduated law school, we were in one of the worst economic times here in the United States. This is in 2007-ish, around that time. And I ended up opening up my own law practice right out of law school. So I think I was like around 26 or something. I opened it up in Queens Boulevard. I rented an office space in the storefront across from the criminal courthouse. And I didn't know what I was necessarily doing, but I know I had to do it. So it was a matter of learning the law on the fly, or I have no shame in my game where I will ask if there's a lot of lawyers in the area where I'll ask for guidance, help, walk me through some processes, give me some advice on how to handle certain areas of the law. And I did that for about 5 years or so. And I think I did okay for myself in that. And I opened up a second office in Princeton, New Jersey. And from there, I ended up joining another practice down there briefly. And when I say briefly, probably not even a year, because at that time I went in there and I kind of changed paths and kind of did a little bit of corporate type law, and I wasn't, in love with that. And I'm an alumni of St. John's University, so I'm big into the sports, and I'd always check the message boards, and there was a link in this basketball section that said St. John's University Law School, and I just kind of scratched my head and I clicked on it. This is out of place. Let me see. And they were offering a master's in LLM in international and U.S. sports law, comparative sports law. I applied. The deadline was like 2 weeks thereafter. I applied, got in, and resigned from that position. Packed up, rented a place here, went back to school. 1 semester of classes being taught by pretty much an expert in every field at that time. That's everyone's a member of SLA. Would come and teach a specific topic, and the second semester would be an internship and a thesis. And one of the professors there, Jeff Fennell, was, for whatever reason, he asked me to come and work for him as his intern. And from there, I stayed with him for about a year, and then went to the Cincinnati Reds for not legal, but for baseball operations. And I was there for a season. And, again, at this point, I'm older, right? So I'm older in the sense of, in my career, I'm not somebody fresh out of law school. And so I needed to find a way to get my hands dirty. I didn't have that luxury of kind of the time to work my way up the ladder. I needed to just get as much practical experience as I possibly can in sports. So an opportunity came to me to go back to work with Jeff, and I did. And I got my hands dirty because it was a great mentor to me and a great, person to teach. I was with him for up until when did COVID start? 2019, 2020. And during that time, I had the birth of my daughter, Kenley, and I spoke with my wife, Andrea, and I was just kind of, decided to take the step back and step away from sports, wanted to be home a little bit more, and took a position as Deputy Attorney General of New Jersey, prosecuting white collar crime. And so I thought I was done with sports. Like I was kind of at peace. I remember specifically having a conversation with him. Like, I'm never going to talk to you again. I'm just, I just want you to know, let's just be friends. And so, and I was just at peace with it, I guess. And then because of SLA, Nona Lee reached out to me and mentioned a position here at Rock. And I looked at it, I researched Rock. I knew about Rock, and I knew what it stood for. And for me, when I was researching to see what they were kind of rebuilding the sports division, they brought in Brody Van Wagenen, they brought in Bob Feld, the opportunity to work with Kim Miali and to work with Juan Perez and to work with Desiree Perez. It was something that was a big factor here because, as I mentioned, I have a daughter. I was 4. And you met my wife, and you've met my daughter. And my wife is a strong woman, and that's what I love about her. And what we see now in sports today, where we have first female coaches, managers, it's great. But by the time my daughter gets to that point of internships in college, it should be the norm. And for me to be able to work with the different women here was a driving force to make a decision to come here. So she could come here and see me work with Cam and see me work with Desiree and others here. So that was the driving force to do it. And, I had conversations with you about it and others from SLA that have become, I like to say, friends. And so, yeah, and now I'm here speaking to you. So it's been kind of surreal because we did meet in 2013 because it was right after the master's class. And they said, you got to go to SLA, you got to go. So I went, and we met when I checked in. I was waiting for my room. We were sitting down and at a bar, and I sat down next to you. We were watching the Braves game, presumably they're playing the Dodgers, and we just talked about baseball. I didn't know who you were, nothing about you. And then I saw you later on that night. I don't think we ever really introduced ourselves, but I know the next day, I'll never forget, and you may not even notice, but the very next day, they had a panel in the large conference room, and I go in there, and I sat down next to my buddy, and I look up, and you're on the stage. And I'm like, wait, that's the guy from yesterday. And I pull open the panel, and there you are, Bobby Hacker. And I'm like, well, wow. And then ever since then, we've been in contact, and it's kind of surreal to come back full circle this year in Atlanta.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. You one of the things you noted, I can't not comment on, was the opportunities for what your daughter's going to learn from people with whom you're working. So to all the women out there, happy International Women's Day.
Happy International Women's Day. That's right.
That's really important. And also this year at our conference, one of the focus is in large part that June 23rd will be the 50th anniversary of Title IX.
Yeah.
So we're celebrating diversity and inclusion in our conference this year. And it's something over the last couple of years that we've really, as an organization, have taken a really good and strong focus on. I think it's important. For years, the sports world is pretty much a closed set.
Mm-hmm.
And I think over the last 20 years, it's really opened up. And you can see it, all across. The examples you just gave, Nona Lee is the chief legal officer at the Diamondbacks. Lots and lots of other people. You look at Val Ackerman, the head of the Big East. She's a product of Title IX, playing basketball and being the first head of the WNBA. I mean, amazing women role models out there. So I think we celebrate them today on this day, but I think it's, the changing inclusive nature of the sports business. And it's really interesting to see baseball executives, more women baseball executives starting to populate, the C-suite. And that's a big and important change because, for example, I have a daughter and she's, a production executive, but she's a baseball fan.
Yeah.
She watches more Dodger games than I do.
Yeah.
And we all hope we can watch baseball games soon.
Sure.
And, for those of you that are saying, oh, Bobby, you've buried the lead, we're not talking about what's going on in baseball today because, I'm protecting the agency side, I'm protecting the league side. I don't want anybody getting their arms up. We all know what's going on. And the two guys sitting here talking to you now are, to say the least, baseball geeks and baseball fans. And as fans, we can't wait for the season to get going. And when we get down the road, Kap will come back and we'll talk about the process.
Absolutely.
But not today. But I'm a big fan of this guy. I like him. Sadly, he's an Orioles fan. It's an accident of birth, and I hate to do that to him. But that's the thing about sports. When you find that connection, there's just something that you can't define it. It's not about reason. It's about just the love of the game.
Yeah.
And I think that informs, people like, I think I can speak for both of us saying, when you love sports and sports gets to be your job, how good is that?
Yeah. I spoke to our group of interns here at Rock today, and a question came up: when did you have that aha moment that you loved it here at Rock? And I commute 2 hours each way, right? Car, train, walk every morning, and right now when I get off with you. And it wasn't until someone here asked me, why do you do that? And I'm like, geez, I guess I must love it, for me to be, I don't love, necessarily, sacrifice things. That's how it's hard to get into this. You sacrifice things, and it's because I have a wife that's supportive of me and an awesome daughter that's cool with, daddy not being there, not all the time during the week. Then I could do this, something I love, so it's kind of like I'm living the dream in that sense, and that, especially since where I started from, you literally know where I started from in 2013. And to get here, I didn't know if it would ever happen, but it was sacrifice. Obviously, I'm omitting a lot of things in that step. It wasn't as fluid as it was, but it's great to be here. I was honored that you reached out to me. If I had to thank everyone at SLA that's helped me along the way, it would be like an Oscar speech. You'd probably have to cut me off. Because there's a lot of people I would love to thank, and it's, but, we'll save that for another time.
Well, I think that speaks to, and here comes my promotional message to all the viewers. No, seriously, part of the value, I think, of our organization, of the Sports Lawyers Association, is the relationships that can be built. And the number of people over the years who tell the same story. Yeah, I was at a conference and I just sat down talking to this guy at the bar, and connections, relationships. And one of the unique things about our organization is that the membership is there to help build relationships. It's not to protect the closed set in which they operate, but it always has been inclusive, and our arms are open. And I think organically and with a lot of effort the last couple of years, we're working to make it a far more diverse organization.
Yeah.
And that's that's representative of the world in which we live. And that's, I think, what we need to do. And so for those of you who haven't renewed your membership yet, it's time to renew your SLA membership. And all the lawyers that work for you, Kap, ought to become members if they're not already.
Do we have to throw it to a commercial break?
This is the commercial break. Yeah, we throw it a commercial before we finish up. And just want you all to know that registration for our annual conference, May 12 to 14 in Atlanta, will be opening hopefully next week. So stay tuned for that information. Sign up. We have a great program. But as you know, we've expanded the content we have throughout the year. So we've had our series this year of Time for Nine, which is our celebration of Title IX. And we have some more programs coming up there. And one more thing, when you sign up for the conference, you'll be eligible for a few pre-conference webinars, and you have to be signed up for the conference to take part in them. And they should be on some really interesting subjects, one of which will be on NFTs.
Yeah.
So we could talk about a lot of stuff, and we could just talk about baseball just as a sport and why it's so great. And,
Yeah, no, we could keep going and going.
But alas, we look forward to, in the not too distant future, having you back, and we can peel back the onion on the whole process of this lockout and where baseball is, and let's get it back. As fans, let's just say as fans, we want it back. And I think everybody feels the same way. So my friend, thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate it. I'll give you a little plug. I'll throw up the rock for you guys.
Appreciate it. There it is.
And
screenshot that if anyone.
Thanks very much. We'll see you all soon.
Thank you,
Take
Bobby.
care. See you in a couple weeks.
Take care. Bye.